Curtis and Son Funeral Home, the North Chapel on Highway 21 in Sylacauga, and the Childersburg Chapel on Highway 280 in Childersburg for pre-need funerals, burials, or cremation since 1975. Curtis and Son Funeral Home, Sylacauga, Childersburg. Funeral service for Lucas Edwards, age 35, of Key West, Florida. That service will be Saturday at 11 a.m. at the sanctuary with Reverend Freddie Edwards officiating. Visitation will be prior to the service, 10 until 11 o'clock. The family will receive flowers or donation can be made to the sanctuary. Online condolences at curtisandsonfh.com. Curtis and Son Funeral Home, North Chapel, in charge of the arrangements. In other obituary news this morning, funeral service for Rachel Morris, who passed away on October the 20th. That service will be today with a visitation from 1 until 2 at the Childersburg Chapel of Curtis and Son Funeral Home. And the service begins at 2, also at the Childersburg Chapel, burial in the Green Hill Cemetery. Curtis and Son Funeral Home, Childersburg Chapel, in charge of the arrangements. Funeral service for Cindy Leslie Moody, age 52, of Sylacauga, will be today at 11 o'clock from the chapel of Radley Smith Funeral Home with the Reverend Tommy Thornton officiating. Burial in the Evergreen Cemetery. Mrs. Moody died Monday, October the 18th at her residence. Radley Smith Funeral Home, Sylacauga, directing. Homegoing celebration remembering the life of Mrs. Carolyn Cat Truss, age 58, of Talladega, is today at 3 o'clock from S.M. Goodson Funeral Home Chapel with Pastor James L. Curry officiating. Interment in the Smith Chapel United Methodist Church Cemetery. S.M. Goodson Funeral Home in Talladega, directing. Kathy Hazelwood, age 48, died October the 16th. Visitation is today from noon until 2 o'clock at Talladega Funeral Home, with the service beginning at 2 with the Reverend Robert Earl Sanders officiating. In lieu of flowers, donation will be made to the Gulf Side Hospice in Heather Hills, at Heather Hills, that in Newport Richey, Florida. Talladega Funeral Home, directing. Funeral service for Mrs. Norma Lee Speak, age 89, of Alexander City, is today at 11 a.m. from Russell Farm Baptist Church with the Reverend Ricky Culp officiating. Burial in the Russell Farm Baptist Church Cemetery. Mrs. Speak died October 17th at Russell Medical Center. Radley Funeral Home, Alexander City, in charge of the arrangements. Homegoing celebration remembering the life of Mr. Lester Camrick Jr., age 80, is Saturday at 1 o'clock from S.M. Goodson Funeral Home Chapel with Pastor Fred Young officiating. Interment in the Kelly Springs Memorial Gardens. Public viewing is today 2 till 7 at the funeral home. S.M. Goodson Funeral Home, directing. Celebration of life for Mr. Cedric LaShawn Rambo Glenn Sr., age 54, is Saturday at 1 o'clock from Mountain Home Baptist Church in Sycamore with the Reverend Robert Duncan officiating. Interment in the Harper Springs Baptist Church Cemetery in Sylacauga. Visitation is today 1 until 7 at the funeral home. Mask will be required for all attending services. Community Funeral Home, Sylacauga, directing. Homegoing celebration remembering the life of Mr. Willie Glenn Bo Harden Jr., age 62, will be Saturday at 11 a.m. from Mount Pisgah Baptist Church Cemetery in Titus, Alabama. Pastor Clarence Henderson officiating. Public viewing is today 2 till 7 at the funeral home. S.M. Goodson Funeral Home, directing. Homegoing celebration remembering the life of Mr. Rico Harrison, age 43, of Talladega, is Saturday at 3 o'clock from S.M. Goodson Funeral Home Chapel with the Reverend John Ragland officiating. Interment in the church cemetery. Public viewing is today 2 till 7 at the funeral home. S.M. Goodson Funeral Home, directing. Celebration of life for Mr. Elijah Kendrick, age 60, is Saturday at 1 o'clock from Community Funeral Home Chapel in Sylacauga with the Reverend Roger Stallworth officiating. Interment in the Evergreen Cemetery. Visitation today 1 until 7 at the funeral home. Community Funeral Home, directing. Memorial service for Mrs. Marima Koroma, age 33, is Saturday at 3 o'clock from Community Funeral Home Chapel. Mass will be required for those attending service. Community Funeral Home, directing. Celebration of life for Mrs. Carolyn Diane Ziegler, age 65, is also Saturday at 11 a.m. from Community Funeral Home Chapel in Sylacauga. Reverend David Cook officiating. Interment in the Sylacauga Cemetery. Visitation today, 1 until 7 at the funeral home. Community Funeral Home directing. Funeral service for Mrs. Brenda Nolan, age 78, of Alexander City, is Saturday at 2 o'clock from Faith Temple Church with Pastor Dick Stark officiating. Burial in the Hillview Memorial Park. The family receiving friends 5 till 7 tonight at the funeral home. Radley Funeral Home directing. Mrs. Ernestine Billups, age 78, of Alexander City, died October the 19th. Funeral service Saturday at 11 o'clock from Great Bethel Baptist Church in Alexander City. Visitation is today 5 till 7 at the funeral home. Armour's Memorial Funeral Home directing. Terry Calhoun funeral service, memorial service will be Monday, October 25th at 1 o'clock from Community Funeral Home Chapel in Sylacauga. And Russell Rusty Brown, age 46, of Goodwater, died October the 20th at Gadsden Regional Medical Center. Curtis & Son Funeral Home, North Chapel, in charge of the arrangements. This obituary report this morning brought to you by Curtis & Son Funeral Home, Sylacauga,